Hello, I'm John Molesky, and this is Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My guest today is David Ottaway. David is a fellow with the Wilson Center's Middle East program. He worked for 35 years for the Washington Post as a foreign correspondent in the Middle East, Africa, and Southern Europe, and later as a national security reporter and investigative reporter in Washington, D.C. His most recent book is titled Mohammed Bin Salman, the Icarus of Saudi Arabia with a question mark, and we'll revisit that question in a minute. David joins us today to discuss President Biden's upcoming trip to the Middle East, in which he is planning to visit Saudi Arabia and meet with the Crown Prince. David, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So you were prescient, as always. I saw your April article on the Wilson Center website, and here's what you wrote. Biden's Saudi oil dilemma was the title. And you wrote, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has created a major international oil crisis that is forcing President Biden to consider seriously abandoning his presidential campaign promise to render Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman a pariah in Washington. And that's what's come to pass. He's breaking the promise, or at least planning to.
Yes, indeed.
Senator Kaine, I should say, yesterday called it an absolutely horrible idea. What is your take on why Biden has made this decision and the reaction, not just from Republicans, but from his own party?
I think for many people, this means Biden's abandonment of defense of human rights, promotion of democracy, etc. And indeed it is to some extent. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, Biden's in a terrible oil dilemma. You know, we don't have enough oil. Gasoline prices are $5 plus. It's going to stay that way for some time. And inflation is, 8%? And he's looking for ways to dig himself out of this economic oil dilemma. And he's hoping that Saudi Arabia would help. I don't think it's going to help to the extent he needs it, but that's another issue. So Realpolitik has come home to the White House.
So Realpolitik says that Saudi Arabia is just too important to the United States in terms of Middle East stability, in terms of global economic stability, to keep them at arm's length.
That's the theory. My conclusion is that what's really going on is less or as much about Iran as it is about oil. And what Biden now has to worry about is Iran's continuing development of its nuclear capability towards possibly building a nuclear bomb. And he has sworn that this will not happen on his watch. And yet the negotiations between the Biden administration and Iran to try to revive the 2015 nuclear agreement limiting Iran's nuclear program has collapsed. Trump withdrew from it in 2018. And Biden has been trying to get the Iranians to come back in if the United States comes back in, and it's not working out. It appears to be the end of the road for negotiating the return of Iran and the United States to that agreement. And what's happening is that after we withdrew, then the Iranians started breaking the terms of the agreement and marching closer and closer towards a capability to build a bomb, including enriching uranium, which they had more or less stopped. Enriching uranium up to nearly bomb grade level.
Which then means if they decide to move forward to bomb grade level, it's a short jump.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you imagine these two men meeting, is it possible for Biden, politically within the United States and then globally as the de facto leader of the Western world, to not bring up the murder of Jamal Khashoggi?
I don't know how he's going to deal with this. And it's going to be a very curious meeting, because I should say if you look at the two press releases describing this coming meeting between the two, the Saudi press release says first there'll be a meeting between Biden and King Salman, as that's the two leaders of the two countries, and then Biden will have a very prolonged meeting with the Crown Prince, dealing with all kinds of issues across the board between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Interestingly, the White House press release makes no mention of Biden meeting with the Crown Prince. Now, a couple of his advisors have since said, yeah, there'll be some meeting, but it's going to be in the context of this big summit of Biden with all members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, that's the Arab Gulf states, plus Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq.
So not a one-on-one.
They're not
At least
saying it's a one-on-one.
Yeah.
But who knows? But it's interesting that there's such a different description of this coming.
Why does he have to meet with MBS in the sense that the king is still the king? And even though we know that the Crown Prince is a powerful political force and the de facto ruler, why does Biden have to take that step?
Because MBS is not going to do anything for the United States before he is rehabilitated in the eyes of Biden, who was very explicit during his, presidential campaign, and then afterwards, that he was going to make Mohammed bin Salman, MBS as he's called, a pariah. And in fact, he hasn't had any conversations with him so far. And
does the pariah label come off with one meeting? Is he essentially rehabilitated?
Let's see how the meeting goes. I am not quite sure how this meeting is going to go. And it's very reminiscent to me. We went through this crisis with Saudi Arabia most recently after 9/11, the terrorist attacks on the United States. And it took 2 years before then Crown Prince Abdullah and George Bush held a meeting in Crawford, Texas, to try and patch up the relationship. That meeting went so poorly that it almost totally collapsed. And the then Secretary of State, Colin Powell, described it as a really ugly scene. So it was more or less a disaster. 2 years later, in 2005, April 2005, there was another meeting, but this time it was very well prepared. And Bush came out and kissed Crown Prince Abdullah on both cheeks, and then took his hand and led him up the garden path to the house, to the ranch. And Abdullah had all prepared a plan for increased production by Saudi Arabia of lots of oil.
All probably agreed to before the meeting.
All agreed to before. Everything went fine. So my question is this meeting between Biden and MBS, is this going to look like the 2002 meeting that was a disaster? Or is it going to look like the 2005 meeting, which went very well?
And if it's 2005, we'd have to assume there's a lot of back-channel negotiating underway already.
But we already know that Biden says oil is not the issue. And I think he's probably right, because the Saudis are sticking with the OPEC plan, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, to which is added Russia and 9 other producers, to slowly increase each month the additional amount they're going to put on the market. And the Crown Prince Mohammed has made no indication that he's going to go break that agreement. So this is not going to help the United States. And I think it would be embarrassing for him to make a big issue, and then the Crown Prince will say, no, we're not. We're sticking with our deal.
Well,
so I think it's really going to be more about Iran.
So let's make the list of what both sides would most like to come out of this meeting. Starting with the U.S., you've already said Iran is at the top of the list.
Yeah.
What other things would the U.S. like to see?
They would like to see more oil.
More oil production.
More oil production. They would like to see, Biden would love to see Saudi Arabia agree to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. They're kind of slowly crawling that way, but the Saudis have said we're not going to establish diplomatic relations until the Israelis revive the peace talks with the Palestinians and try and find a solution to the Palestinian issue. But they would love to see some kind of progress on that front. And the Saudis are not against it because they have one common issue, particularly with the Israelis, and that is Iran, just as we have one big issue in that area, and that's Iran. So the speculation is, are the three going to form some kind of a military alliance, formally or under the table, to deal with Iran? Mm-hmm. So I think everybody's going to be watching to see what kind of progress is made in an improvement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that's what Biden would very much like to see.
So from the Saudi perspective, similarly, Iran is on the list. And
the other thing the Saudis want, they want more of a commitment from the United States to defend them against attacks by Iran, particularly missile and cruise, and for a very good reason. Back in September 2019, the Iranians attacked with, they set loose simultaneously 25 cruise missiles and drones and hit two vital Saudi oil installations and cut their production by half. Now, of course, the Iranians said they didn't do it, and the Houthis in Yemen said we did it, but everybody knows Iran did it. And the United States did not come to its rescue. In fact, Trump, who had the best relations with Mohammed Bin Salman of any American president ever, said, we don't need to do anything because American interests are not at stake, which is a crushing blow to the Saudis, because it indicated the U.S. was not about to protect them from any attacks from outside the country.
And when oil production is cut by 50%, how long does it take them to ramp it back up?
Well, they got it back up in about 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. They very quickly recovered. But the Iranians showed, A, they could do it, B, they could get away with it because neither the Americans nor the Saudis were able to find out where the cruise missiles were and the drones were coming from, and they all got through except two didn't fail to go off. But, it was devastating. And the U.S. was not able to protect Saudi Arabia. So they want a more explicit U.S. commitment to protect them from Iranian missile or any kind of attack, which would mean probably us retaliating if another one occurs on Iran, which is...
militarily.
Yeah, which is a big issue.
It's a big commitment. Yeah.
Big commitment.
So stepping back from this meeting that has the world buzzing, give us the update on how Saudi Arabia is doing. In the past we've talked about the attempted reforms, MBS trying to somehow modernize the country while still maintaining control. Yeah. How are they doing?
I'd say it's a mixed report card. Let's start with what's not working. That's political reform. The current government under the de facto rule of MBS, Mohammed Bin Salman, is more repressive than any Saudi regime or kingdom, king or crown prince I can remember for decades. They do not allow, not only do they not allow any political activity, they allow no criticism of anything Mohammed bin Salman is doing.
David, is that a function of real threats and opposition or paranoia?
I think it's on the part of the Crown Prince, it's a bit paranoia because he's not king yet. So until he's king, he's not he can be 80% sure he's going to become king, but
There's
you
still a
know,
little insecurity there.
But yeah, there's an element of insecurity until he's king. So it's partly that, and it's partly he just doesn't want any criticisms. I mean, he doesn't want. So that's on the political side. But on the social side, he has unleashed what I would call a real revolution in the country. He has brought in all kinds of, I remember Saudi Arabia. There were no movies, there were no cinemas, there were no bands, there was no singing. I mean, the ultra-conservative Wahhabi clerics just had buttoned down that place, so you couldn't smile out of order. Now there's just a tsunami of outsider. Well, during the COVID, it stopped for a while, but generally speaking, and it's reviving now. They've let in all kinds of Western bands and singers and Arab bands and singers, and movie theaters are going up across the country. It's a real social revolution. And all kinds of sports events coming in, international sports event. Even women have come from the World Wrestling Entertainment. Women have come to wrestle in Saudi Arabia.
Wow. Yeah.
They've had the heavyweight boxing match there. I mean, all kinds of things. And some say this is kind of, particularly on the sports side, this is sports washing. That's true. It is sports washing. But it's going much deeper than sports washing. And it's really bringing about a change in what Saudis can do. And women now are getting involved in all kinds of sports activities that they didn't do before. Their own league for soccer and basketball. I mean, these are really huge changes. In particular, people for me who have been going there for decades. Huge social changes.
Is it making the king and the crown prince more popular?
Yes.
Yeah.
Particularly with the young people, obviously, and with women. Women are being promoted in the labor force, and there more sectors of the economy are being open to women. Big change for women, big change for youth, big change for women. That are all for the good, whereas the political changes are all for the bad. So on the one hand, on the other hand.
Well, David, thank you. This has been a fascinating primer.
My pleasure.
As always. The old hockey announcer I love used to say, knowing me is like going to college. Well, I'll say knowing you is like going to college. Thanks for the class. Appreciate it. And maybe we get to see what happens after the meeting. There'll be occasion to debrief that as well.
Yeah.
Our guest has been David Ottaway. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for your time and interest.